I'll get the button pushed here.
Oh, you actually have a new doorbell.
I think I've seen that one before, but I don't know.
It wasn't white.
Yeah. But I think I've seen this one a couple of times. I don't know. Okay, we got a green light. We're ready to go. Well, good morning, everybody. This is Thursday, October 10th, 2024. It is 7:35 a.m., and this is the meeting of the Edina Housing and Redevelopment Authority for this particular date. And we are continuing to do our meetings on a hybrid sort of fashion, whether it's at the City Council level or the HRA level. You can participate today in community comment. There is no public hearing matter today in which you can participate. The call numbers will come up on the screen here. If you want to call in and let folks know that you'd like to speak to the HRA on a matter of concern to you that's not on the agenda today or otherwise scheduled for a future public hearing. And so feel free to call in, and we'll be taking up those community comments right at the front end of the meeting. So make sure you get this information. We'll put it back up on the screen, but get it down if you can. Having provided that information, I'm going to call the meeting to order and ask Jennifer Benarott to call the roll.
Good morning. Commissioner Jackson.
Here.
Commissioner Pierce.
Here.
Commissioner Agnew.
Here.
Chair Hovland.
Here.
And Commissioner Risser is not here at this time.
All right, thank you. And I'm looking at the agenda. It says pledge of, and I think I know what that means. Pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we have a form of meeting agenda in front of us that's been published, and I think there's a good recommendation here from the staff that we switch items 8.1 and 8.2, so 8.2 would go first. It makes more sense from a sequential standpoint, I think, based on what conversations we've had in the past, both sitting as the HRA and the City Council. Would someone care to make a motion to approve the agenda with the switching of the recommended order in 8.1 and 8.2?
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Jackson moves, Commissioner Pierce seconds the adoption of the meeting agenda, switching items 8.1 and 8.2 in sequence. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the meeting agenda as stated, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Now we are at community comment. Let's have those numbers go back up on the screen if possible. And then is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address the HRA on a matter of concern to them? Matter that's not otherwise on the agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing? Okay. Nobody coming forward? Do we have anybody online?
I don't have anyone online yet, but because there is a slight delay in the broadcast, I would recommend we wait 1 minute before moving on. My clock shows that it's 7:35, so I'll come back to you at 7:36 or when I have a caller, whichever is first.
Thank you.
It is now 7:36, and I still don't have a caller, so I think it's safe for you to move forward with the agenda.
All right, very good. Thank you, Director Benarott. Following community comment, we usually have our executive director respond to community comments that were made the prior meeting, excuse me, not the week before, but the prior meeting. And there were no community comments at the prior HRA meeting, so we'll just move forward from there with the consent agenda items. Is there anyone on the HRA, any commissioner who wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the items on the consent agenda in a single motion.
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Jackson moves, Commissioner Pierce seconds the adoption of the items on the consent agenda in a single motion. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adoption of the items on the consent agenda in a single motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. All those items are adopted on the consent agenda that are part of the consent agenda. And now we're going to get to the heart of the meeting this morning, and that is in the reports and recommendations portion of the agenda. And the first matter we're going to hear about is the 8.2 reversed with 8.1. Makes more sense sequentially, I think, to talk about this too first. And that is, we had a discussion in the past about our past city council meeting about what could we do at that Macy's Home Store site. We've got an approved project there, but what are the other possibilities at that site if we didn't use TIF or just use TIF to a lesser degree? So I think I'm going to turn now to our Economic Development Manager, Bill Neuendorf, and have him lead out this discussion.
Yes, good morning. Bill Neuendorf, the city's Economic Development Manager. This morning we wanted to have further discussions about the use of tax increment financing on the Macy's Furniture site over at 7235 France Avenue. So we don't have any, I don't have any new information for you this morning, but I just wanted to set the stage. The developer, Patrick Brahma, with Enclave Companies, is here with us this morning, and here he's prepared to respond to several questions that have been posed to him over the last couple weeks about his proposals. So I'll just set the stage. The image on the slide is the current site, 8-acre parcel built in 1977, currently used as the Macy's Furniture store. That's a use that does continue today, and the intention is that they would sell the property, relocate to another location in Edina, renovate that property, and free up this site. So it's a multi-step phase just to get to groundbreaking for this new project. We've got to move this business and these operations first. So there's some time involved in this one. The project itself is led by Enclave Companies, and one of their partners is Lifestyle Communities. So as you'll recall, the site is split into 4 different buildings, and there's 3 different lots. The northwest building, which is the mixed use, the 2 buildings on the east, which are predominantly residential with a little cafe on one of the corners, and then the southwestern building is a more intensive mixed use high rise. Since the site's being split into these 3 different elements, as we prepare our redevelopment agreements, our contracts essentially, we started getting into it and realized that we didn't just need 1 contract, we needed 3, because each of these parcels is very unique. They'll have separate groups of investors in each one. The financing structure for each one is different. And so suddenly our workload to prepare these agreements went from 1 single agreement to 3 different agreements. So we had hoped to bring the full projects to you this morning for your consideration, and frankly, we're not there yet. We're still working through a lot of that writing and drafting. We want to make sure that when the projects are being delivered, that the city gets all the public benefits that we've been talking about from them. So right now, we're working diligently with the attorneys on that one to get those contracts prepared, and we do expect to bring them to you later in this month or in early November. But the project is the same. So the information in your packet this morning actually dates back to July. If you recall, in late July, we put together a term sheet for your consideration that outlined the general parameters of how TIF could be used to get this project off the ground and to deliver these public benefits. We continued that conversation in August, made some revisions based on your suggestions, and now as we prepare these actual contracts, we're using that revised term sheet as the basis for our contract negotiations and preparations. Along the way, there's been a lot of questions that have been posed about should TIF be used? Is this the right amount? And then some hypothetical questions of, well, what would the site look like if we didn't use TIF? Do we really need to use it on this? So that's a question that I think is best answered by the developer, and that's why he's here this morning. He has a brief presentation to share. And so the slides that I'm showing here are just quick reminders of what the project is entailing. This is the northwest parcel, the mixed use with office, retail, restaurant, and residential. The southwest corner is the high-rise with condominiums, a good deal of Class A office space, and some retail restaurant space. And then on the east side of the property, facing the promenade, are the 2 residential buildings with a cafe on the first floor. Of course, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about the term sheet or where we are moving forward, but what we really wanted to do was set this time aside for the developer to give some answers to your questions. And then myself, Patrick Brahma with Enclave, and also Nick Anhut from Ellers and Associates is here, and we are all happy to answer any questions and give you the information that you need to make a decision, not today, but in the future. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Brahma unless there's any immediate questions.
All right, good. Thank you, Mr. Newendorf. Commissioner Jackson has a question for you.
Yes, I think maybe I'm going to ask it now. Let's just sort of talk about the size and scope of this potential note. So when we did, it's a multi-part question, I don't know where to start, but when we did Maison Green, there was TIF associated with the development and then TIF associated with the street reconstruction around it. Was that one note or 2 notes when we did that?
Sure, good question. So the Maison Green project, Reuter Walton was the developer there, and we did use TIF on that project. A little bit simpler project, 1 building, 1 site, 1 developer. But in that project, it's very similar to what we're striving to do here, is leverage this tax-based growth on this private property to fund public improvements either in or adjacent to the property. So on Maison Green, we did agree to one approximately $5 million note to the developer to help get their project going and also to secure some land that they will be giving to us. And then on top of that, there was sufficient cash flow from that new project. That's around a $90 million project. There's enough cash flow to fund the public improvements that we just finished. So as we went through that entitlement process, some of the concerns we heard from the neighborhood were about challenges in walking and bicycling and turning in and out of their neighborhoods. And there was no budget planned in the capital budget to make those kind of roadway or sidewalk improvements. But with the Maison Green project, how we leveraged it was to issue the note to the developer, get the project going, get the tax base enhanced, and then capture that new tax base to fund these new improvements. So that was one note to the developer, and then the city issued a separate contract for the roads. That's how our engineering department prefers to do it. For public infrastructure that we own and maintain, we would rather hold those contracts and have the contractor answer to us. And so on this proposed project, we're looking at a similar type of outcome where the developer would be responsible for the work on their private property. They would hire the contractor, they would get the debt, they would get the equity, and then we would reimburse them through TIF notes later. But also we think the project would generate enough revenue for the city if we chose, and I know we're not there yet, but if we chose to proceed with some type of pedestrian crossing in the future, there should be I don't know if there'll be exactly enough funding at this point. I think we're going to look at other sources as well. But there's a large chunk of funding from this site that could start that underpass project. So very similar arrangement to the Maison Green.
Okay, thank you. And then on this project, what is the approximate size of the note that we would be working with the developer on? So it was $5 million for Maison Green. What would it be for this one?
Sure, so this is a much larger project. So this one, the value is just under $300 million of private investment. The TIF note would be sized at the financial gap that they're seeing, which is around $23 million. And for this project that we're speaking about today, we would actually break that into 3 separate notes. So each phase of the project would get a note commensurate with their size and with the benefit they deliver. But they would all total about $23 million.
Okay, so that's approximately 7.5% of the overall project would, or a little bit, 7.7%.
Yep, that's correct.
Would be the size of the note relative to the overall project.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That's all I've got.
Yeah, I thought that was a good point you raised there, Commissioner Jackson, is that we've typically tried to stand to that 10% mark in the circumstances where we do use TIF, tax increment financing.
Correct.
Yeah. Good. So we're at 7.5%. Yep.
7.7.
All right, other questions for Manager Newendorf? At this point in time, I'd always they could bring Mr. Brahma up here to talk about, I'd say that Commissioner Pierce has been the one, leading this conversation in terms of the level of curiosity, I think, of whether it's the council or the HRA, but he's been kind of the point person on this. And, but we look forward to your thoughts. I know that you've been asked to think about what kind of a project could you build here if you didn't have the tax increment financing available like you have for like you tentatively have for the approved project. Yeah. We've still got a ways to go on that, but nonetheless, it's an important step in the process. And I know you've got a little sheet here that you provided to us, so we're eager to hear what you have to say this morning. Mr. Brahma, welcome. Please give us your full name and address.
Morning, Mayor, members of the HRA. Patrick Brahma, 1660 South Highway 100, St. Louis Park. I'm with Enclave Companies. We're the developer on this project. Glad to be here with you again and continue the conversation on what we think is a wonderful project. I appreciate the continuous feedback and in collaboration on this project. So I'll go through this presentation. Admittedly, we've been working with you guys it's been about 18 months, almost 2-year roughly process. This would be the least visually exciting presentation I have provided to date, and I just want to give you that disclaimer. So I apologize. Lots of words and Patrick talking. So I'll go through this. Basically it's a one-page document, but I kind of go through and highlight different sections of it. That way, as I'm talking through it, we can follow along with where I'm pointing to and what I'm talking about. In general, there's been 3 questions that we've been discussing with the City Council over the last couple of weeks. I'll go through those 3 questions. They're the 3 questions that are shown on your screen here. First is what would happen to this project, the project that was approved on 9/17, received final approvals, if TIF wasn't available or, for the sake of clarity, of some sort of financial assistance or investment. People use different terms, but if there wasn't some sort of support to the project, what would happen? Then kind of reversing that question backwards, if assistance was taken away, what type of project could occur here? And so we'll go through that in a little bit of detail. And then taking that question even a step further, was asked, okay, those changes to the project, what would be taken away? What's the dollar value roughly to those things so we can understand the scope or the impact of those various items? So I'll go through these 3 questions. Before I go into that, I did make a note. Mr. Newendorf's presentation was great and accurate. I just want to make, for anybody that gets into the details or geeks out on plans the way that I do, the renderings that were included in that are some of the original renderings on the project. We did go through, as you well know, multiple rounds of land use review. We ended up updating those renderings based on public feedback received through a public process. And so from our perspective, there's further enhancements to the articulation, the site plan, green space, dog park, connections to the promenade that are not on those plans, only for the sake of clarity for anybody that's watching from the public. Okay, so jumping into this presentation or note sheet that we put together. Starting at the top, the first question, what would happen to this project if TIF was not available? The direct answer is that this project that was approved on 9/17 wouldn't work. There is a financial gap. Ellers obviously has done their underwriting to validate that financial gap. So just to be clear, if anybody hasn't heard it, this project wouldn't move forward. We're not in a position financially to make it work without TIF as approved. I do want to mention for the record that we've attempted to be transparent, that we knew a financial gap existed on the project and that this discussion would be needed and that assistance would be needed at some level. Because of the questions that have occurred recently, we went back and checked records just to make sure that I'm not just verbally saying that. So all of the applications that we've made, I dated them here, and each of those applications also included in some cases, 2 or 3 meetings with different boards and commissions. We attempted to at least verbally state that we don't know if or how much TIF would be needed or exactly what the financial gap is, but we knew there is a gap. And until we get through land use approvals and really understand the total project costs and understand the scope of the project, we won't know that final gap. But we knew a gap existed, and we're obviously sophisticated enough and have done enough projects to know up front in general where a project is headed. And so we've tried to be transparent that that would be the case on this project from the very beginning. So what would need to change with this project? So the project that was approved on the 17th, to make it work without TIF, I'm going to do a couple preambles just because from our core value perspective, we just want to be transparent. We're going through this question because we're being asked. We're not requesting these changes. We're not proposing these changes. We are aware and we're made aware and are conscious of the city's policies that they have in place, sustainability policies, affordability policies, comprehensive plan, small district plans. We obviously went through multiple steps of concept plan review with the community. For us, it's a huge part of the initial process with the city to make sure that we're understanding the city's processes and plans and vision. And so a core value for Enclave is that we don't want to be the developer that's going to the communities and trying to ask for exceptions to all the rules. We want to follow the city's vision. So that's what we tried doing here on this particular project. So I'm going to outline a handful of these different items that are really the biggest impact on a project driving this particular project to need assistance or creating a financial gap said backwards. So affordable housing is, and the first two that I'm going to outline here are the two most impactful. Affordable housing is pretty straightforward. I'm going to go through these different items that are the big drivers, and then on the right side, the next section, I'll identify dollar values to that. But affordable housing, there isn't a ton to discuss there. It's pretty straightforward policy and impact on the project. There's 10% affordability, 50% AMI across this project. We're in the 570 something units, so there's quite a bit of affordable housing on this project. That is a big impact to a project. Land use strategy. This project, and we've followed and bought into the city's vision for the site. We think the Southdale District guidelines are, we're aware of them and think ultimately what has been approved here is a great project. So we're not throwing out these comments in opposition to the city's vision for this area. However, it is a reality of the financial performance of a project. It does weigh on a project and make it more expensive to construct a project. So some of the things we were asked, what could we do to change to make the project work? And really it comes down to simplifying the project. That's the short answer. So I'll go through that in a little bit detail here, but making the project, the net outcome would be a simplified project that is more efficient, which lowers the per unit cost of construction, while still, in our perspective, delivering a good project that still can generate the rents that we need. And it would just reduce the financial gap. So if we can come in at a lower cost and still maintain good rents, the financial gap is reduced. And so this is a big mover on the project. What would it look like? Right now, this project includes 4 blocks. We would need to swap it out to 2 blocks. So you'd have 2 larger buildings. Right now, the parking is separated into 4 blocks, obviously because the buildings are all split apart. The below-ground parking, we would connect it. It would be much more efficient, perfectly rectangular parking. That's what we do on most of our projects. That's very efficient. Some of that parking would likely come out of ground and be at grade or above ground. And the screening of that parking, there would be some screening. We wouldn't want ugly parking. We wouldn't propose that, but it wouldn't be as to the standard likely that the community would prefer on this site. There would be some more surface parking. It wouldn't be significant. This site just doesn't have enough space for significant surface parking to make a project work, but or the level of density that we need to make a project work, but there would be more surface parking than we have right now. The exterior design of the project would take a step back. It'd be something closer to like a 71 France. What else do we have on here? Right now, the project has, from our perspective, a lot of mix of use. We have a decent amount of office and retail. The intensity of mixed use would come down. Office and retail are high risk drivers for a developer. The higher the risks, the higher returns that investors require. So just from that metrics alone, pulling out big risk factors can drive down the minimum returns that an investor is going to require on a project. And in addition to that, the biggest cost driver in these buildings is concrete. So parking and office and retail drive significant amount of parking. So we can get far more efficient with our parking in these buildings. If we move to a strategy, and I'm not proposing this, that eliminated the public parking on the first floors, we could really just have true apartment buildings that would be very efficient and cost effective, and we pull out a lot of concrete out of these buildings. So again, 4 buildings to 2, and those 2 buildings probably are very heavily residential. Unit counts probably go up. Office, commercial space goes quite a bit down, maybe down to a minimal amount. You're probably looking at structures or buildings that are kind of like the Fred that you're familiar with. They'd still be 5/2, 7 stories out of grounds, 5 stories of wood frame construction. The other component that would change on this site is, and we're proud to have worked with the city on this, but there's a lot of public realm, there's a lot of public space, there's increased setbacks in certain areas. There's amenities in certain areas that you're well aware of. We would, to make this work, we would be pulling those things out and going to more of a standard suburban type approach where you have a sidewalk system that wraps a building and meet the city's code requirements for plantings and trees. And so it's not, we do this stuff all the time, so we don't think it's a bad project. We still would be proud of that type of project. It just obviously isn't the same as the city's vision and our discussions to date.
Mr. Brahma, hold that thought for a second. Commissioner Jackson has a question for you.
Yes, thank you. You're getting some water.
Yeah.
So when we talk about merging the 2 buildings, I remember in the process of changing the land use plans along the way, that it was pretty difficult to accommodate having the potential of an underpass. And I thought you could, so obviously if we merge the 2 buildings, that underpass goes away. So tell me sort of if I've got this correct. So parking would be easier and cheaper if we didn't have the underpass. We wouldn't have a east-west corridor through there, so it'd be a big block. But tell me a little bit about the difficulty of planning around the potential underpass.
And I apologize, I hadn't gotten to that. It is noted here, and that's a good point. So I apologize, I didn't cover that. So
Okay.
This project, as you well know, a big part of the strategy of the design and layout of this project, and part of the public process we went through that resulted in a pause, was learning about and receiving feedback on a potential underpass connection across France Avenue. And the outcome of that discussion was landing that underpass in the middle, basically the middle of our site. And that resulted in the need of us to adjust our site layout and the design of our buildings. If you look at our site plan today, you'll notice that the northwest building is a small building. It's not, the one thing doesn't look like the other, so it's a small, unique building. That's because in order to get a slow grading ramp down to the center of our site, on the west side of our site, to make that connection across France, we had to create an extra 50-foot corridor across the south side of our site to wrap up for that ramping down for a connection across France. And then to your point, Councilmember Jackson, there was a desire to make sure that there was an east to west connection from the promenade directly to the landing point of whatever that connection would be in the future. Underpass is the current assumption. And so in reverse, if we only have 2 buildings, that east to west connection is gone. If we go back to a more traditional layout that we're proposing and talking about, that path that's available along the south side, we would request to have it reduced in width. So, and then the last component is the way that we're designing the structural integrity of these buildings against France Avenue. They're being designed at extra cost to take structural load of excavation and pull away of dirt in the future for a potential underpass. So there's a few factors that we've included into this project and intentionally in our design that are cost drivers.
Okay, so and I'm just going to summarize for the people listening. There are 2 regional connectors that have influenced the design you have now, and they would both I mean, we wouldn't get rid of the regional path, obviously, but the improvements to the regional bike trail would be gone, and then everything, the complex things to do with the underpass would be gone.
Well, yeah, in this hypothetical, yes, that's
Yes,
correct, is the
yes.
short answer. We're not asking for that, but yes, that's
Those would
correct.
be things we would
Yep.
have to give up if we hadn't asked for them. You would not have included them.
That's correct.
Okay, terrific, thank you.
Commissioner Agnew.
Thank you. So I obviously have a lot of questions, but I have one short one, then I'll let you kind of wrap up. But what is the difference, swag estimate, that you would think of in the total number of units of housing between this potential this hypothetical situation and the current proposal we have?
We have not done a redesign and actually done a plan for the unit count of the buildings merged. The way that we've been looking at right now, we've been assuming a slight increase, but we haven't dug deep, so I'd have to actually do a design to figure that out. My guess off the top of my head, you might be 5 to 10% more. The reason why I pause on that is you have to go, it's a big stress testing analysis. It's not a simple direct path, and what I'm getting at is it may be more efficient on this project because of the cost of concrete and the parking ratios that you can get with the physical square foot of the site to keep the exact same exact unit count, but we're so much more cost effective per unit that just staying at that unit count is the way to go versus trying to push unit count up higher, and now you have to add another floor of concrete. The concrete floors of parking are the most expensive part of these projects, so we'd have to get very deep into to be able to answer that question with more certainty. So I would say probably no more than 10% increase, but it could end up being a similar number if we did a redesign.
Thank you. That is really helpful, just directional. I think that's fair. And then when you do mention the elimination of affordable housing, so that is a policy that we have as a city. So would you, in that situation, then hypothetically be looking to do the buy-in?
This analysis that we have here is assuming just the policy doesn't exist, not even the buy-in. It would just be, there's no affordability payment or compliance is what this analysis is suggesting. I'm not requesting that, but that's what this is suggesting.
Okay, thank you. I do have more broader conversation, but I'm happy to complete.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Brumla.
The third item is in relation to public spaces, public streets, public right-of-way, public realm. There isn't ever a perfect way to describe this because it's a little bit variable, but in general on this particular project, as you know, Gallagher Drive comes in on the south side of our site. That is located on private property, owned, maintained, liability of private property owner. This project requires the reconstruction of that road. We also have the new north to south road. There's public easement over it, so it's going to function like a public road, but it's privately owned, operated, maintained, liability. There's obviously public space that's included on this project as well. And the expansion of the promenade and a few other areas. In some communities, those areas through the platting process get dedicated to the city, and the city owns, operates, maintains, and takes care of the liability of those things. I know that's an intentional strategy for the city, which again, I'm not asking for a change to, but there is a cost to that, and so that is a driver here, and I'll outline that as well. And then the sustainability policy also has costs associated with that that I'll touch on here in a moment. And then just a couple of caveats, just because we're throwing out so much information, I think the caveats are important. Trying to compare, and this is something developers do, not even on this public stage, trying to compare one real estate development to another and making hypothetical comparisons without being able to bid two like projects on the exact same site with two sets of plans at the exact same time. There will always be minor discrepancies because difference in market and time. And so I just want everybody to know this isn't a perfect science without what I just said. Two sets of full plans bid at the same time at the exact same site. So there's a little wiggle here for disclaimer for everybody. The market conditions do matter very much. And then the last thing, not asking, but it got brought up in the subsequent conversation, I just do want to identify this project is paying, and depending on how someone would define development fees, the answer is slightly different, but this project's paying about $6 to $10 million of development fees, depending on your perspective. There's a cost impact there, and again, if someone was asking the question, how can we make this work without TIF? That's another bucket that someone may or may not be willing to consider. We're not requesting. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to making connections and dollar values to those four buckets that we outlined. I've been talking a lot, so I'm looking at you one last time before I continue down this column. Is it okay if I continue on?
Please do.
Okay. So I'll go through these four different buckets here. First, affordability. We took the 30, just to update everybody, originally we were at 20 years assumed affordability. We understood the city's policy was updated recently to 30 years, or at least when we originally came in thinking about this project, we thought it was 20 to 25 years, and recently we were made aware that it's actually 30. And so I'm saying that in the context of what we're showing here. We're showing 30 years of rent loss on those affordable units, and we're doing a net present value calculation of that rent loss. We're discounting it at a 6.25% discount rate, and we're including 2.5% inflation. What I'm getting at is if we just did a surface like, hey, $800,000 over 30 years, that totals $26 million. That's not necessarily a fair way to represent that number. We need to discount that back to net present value. So we're showing $16 million. Throw out another caveat, different people do these calculations differently, and someone might look at this differently and have a different perspective, but this is just one way of looking at it. It's how we look at it, is that's the rent loss that we have on the rental buildings. On the condo side, we're not dealing with long-term cash flow analysis or loss of rents. What we're talking about is a one-time upfront construction cost impact to the project. So they're at $3.4 million. So when you combine them together, we're looking at that roughly $16 million if you net present value back the loss of rent. On the land use side of things, I had mentioned that caveat of trying to understand the difference in pricing with construction costs is very difficult, short of what I said but we're actually in a unique position, or Enclave is right now. We have another seven-story building out of ground that's under construction right now in a walkable environment in downtown Rochester. That project and the style of building is very similar to what elimination of 1 through 4 there looks like. So we have a real life example with construction costs that we can compare to this particular project. And so that's what this section does. It compares a project that includes 1 through 4 to one that doesn't. And I guess I'd even add a caveat with that Rochester project that I'm comparing this to. They did qualify for a redevelopment TIF district. We did investigate the potential use of TIF on that project. They did have a sustainability policy, affordability policy, commercial requirement, mixed use requirement, green space requirement that all kicked in if you use TIF. For a number of reasons, we ended up not going the route of TIF, but it's actually set up well here to be able to make a comparison between projects versus me just doing forecasted takeoffs and making assumptions. So that project was $230,000 per unit. Right now, our pricing for per apartment unit, this particular project for construction costs ranges between $260,000 and $275,000 per unit, depending on the building. The Northwest building is the most expensive because of all the mixed use and extra concrete and inefficient layout. And so then and then further in this analysis, if you read through it, for the sake of being conservative, not in the favor of the developer, I pulled back those numbers, pulled back the gap. I took $5,000 off per unit, and so I included the range of what that could be at the top there. So it could be $13 to $20 million. The majority of apartment units we have on this project are not in the Northwest building, so you'd be looking at something that's closer to the 15-ish, 14-ish million is my assumption if you did a very deep analysis. So that's roughly the difference between, if we did change our project today to something that's closer to, didn't include the 4 things on the left there. In other words, basically what we have in Rochester right now, that's about the savings that we assume would occur. But without designing it and bidding it, we're making assumptions. The third item, operations and maintenance, I talked through on the left there, kind of the background on that. We did have our maintenance team work with a subcontractor to put together some rough estimates of the ongoing maintenance for this project and the difference between a project that has all of the extra setbacks, all of these public spaces that are privately maintained, the way that it's set up in this proposed project, the approved project, the way that we're proposing here, versus a traditional project where most of those spaces is turned public. The intensity of plantings is less, as you well know. The level of plantings and landscaping on the site were enhanced to match the promenade, to make it feel like you're not leaving the promenade when you come through our site, that the promenade is flowing through our site. And so if we reduce everything down, the levels down to a more standard level, and then a lot of the public space was dedicated to the public, including the roads, we could save $500,000 to $100,000 per year on maintenance. This project also kicked in the city's requirement for us to do a park maintenance fee, a special park maintenance fee for the promenade, totaling $86,000 a year. And so you can see the total impact over 25 years here. We did not do a net present value calculation on that, so just know if someone did a net present value calculation, the total there would come down, but that's the face value of adding that up over 25 years, the life of the TIF district. Yep.
No, just go ahead and finish, and then I'll follow up after. I think this is your last bullet point? Yeah.
Time for water break too, thank you. Okay, last item is sustainability. Sustainability, there's a range here, and we don't show the top end of the range. I'll walk through why that is. What we did on the short end of the range there, identified very specific, straightforward costs. The sustainability policy, as you well know, has certain design requirements, what's the word I'm thinking of, modeling requirements, and then commissioning requirements. So there's a lot of soft costs that are involved with complying with that policy on this project. Over the 4 buildings, we're looking at about $500,000 of soft costs that are added. So that's not construction costs. It's not physically changing anything to the project. It's just the soft costs. And then in addition to that, and it's not a city requirement, but encouraged, we added solar to 2 of our buildings. So those are very straightforward costs that I can easily say these are extra costs that we're showing. That's at $1.2 million. There are other costs, but one thing I wanted to do is make sure that I wasn't double counting. Those other costs that might be increased costs in mechanical or increased costs in the envelope or insulation of a building, those types of things to make the project more efficient from an energy perspective, those are already picked up in number 2. So I'm showing the lower number in sustainability to avoid, I don't want to be disingenuous and double count dollars. So realize that was long-winded, and thanks for hanging in with me. I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for going through the exercise and really embracing the question that was asked. And so I just wanted to just frame this. The reason I asked the question, whenever that was, a month ago or a couple weeks ago, whenever, everything is connected. And so when I read through what you have here, there's a couple of things that stand out to me. The project that we have in front of us, right, it's a beautiful project, right? When you step back and you think about the vision in that space, I think it's a beautiful project. But I do think our processes kind of lead us toward an outcome fairly early on in the process. And so just your first bullet point, this project would not occur but for TIF. Like, we talk about TIF, 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 and what we really should be saying is, right? The city needs to make an investment in this project. Well, what are the options for that? Well, TIF is one of those, right? We also look at grants, right? We could do bonds. There's lots of things we could do. Now, they may not create the capacity of $20 million to do the project, but I do think it's healthy for the city to be thinking about, if we want to do this and we need to make an investment, what's the best way to do that, okay? So that was the first thing that was in my head, is I would like to make sure, as we look at things like this, we're framing it that way. And so that's the first thing. I think it's healthy for us to be able to have a conversation about choices. But you can't have a conversation about choices if you don't know what those choices cost. You don't know what the impact is of those choices. And so I've done this just as all of us have. We have a site plan in front of us. We're giving non-binding feedback. I will say, well, what if I'd like for affordable housing to be not revert back to market? Well, that has a cost to it. When I make that statement in a council meeting, I don't know what the cost is of that. And so we kind of all have things that we add to the project, but without really knowing what the impact is to the project, other than it definitely is in the benefit of the city for most of the things that we suggest. But I don't know that that is a healthy way to do it. And so by the time we've done that, you've probably spent almost $2 million to get to this point. And so I appreciate the right side of your spreadsheet, because I think it's healthy for us to be able to have a conversation, which takes time, right? We can't have the conversation today, but have a conversation about choices. And I'm not hearing anybody say this, but I'm just I'm just kind of painting with broad strokes. You could argue with your land use strategy points. As a city, perhaps we can't really afford our comp plan because there's a gap there. All right, well, if that's true, then what do we need to do as a city to make sure that the things that we have in there we can achieve? Maybe we can achieve them in a longer period of time. Maybe we can structure projects differently so that we can continue to progress towards what's in the comp plan. Those kinds of conversations, I'm used to in business as a leader, having those kinds of conversations. And so I'm simply trying to frame, from a process standpoint, it would be healthier for us to be able to do that. And so I know my comment about, I don't know if we can afford our comp plan, that's a big, broad stroke. But I say that for effect, and I think everybody can understand where I'm going when I say that. And so then I'll go back to everything is connected. We're also looking at a proposed tax levy increase of 13%. Now, we're doing some work on that. So everybody hear me say that. I'm gonna say it 3 times. We're doing some work on that. We're doing some work on that. We are doing some work on that. I mention that for the same framing reason. If we do this project or a project and we use TIF, we definitely create more tax capacity, but it sits in the district for whatever the time frame we set for that tax district. So if we're in a position where we need additional revenue, could it be better for us to have a project that can be done in 2 years without TIF? Maybe it's not 350 million in tax capacity. Maybe it's 150, but that 150 goes directly to the general fund once that project is complete. Again, everything's connected, and so that is how I think about a lot of this. But I think our process has to enable us to be looking at all of these pieces that layer on top of each other and not making a decision without those factors being in place. And so a lot of what I'm teeing up, Mr. Brahma, is not the developer, right? This is not all on you. Some of this is for sure on city process. And I think we can make a lot of progress in terms of looking at how we do this. And so the last thing I will add is that, and I think I said this already, we may look at this and have a conversation as a council and say, again, hypothetically, you have a list of things on the right. We may choose as a city, you know what, we don't have $22 million to invest in this, but we'd like to get it done. So maybe we can make choices in here that relax some of the standards or delay some of the value so that we can get the project done. Those kinds of conversations we would have to have, and I think you've already heard my colleagues start to dive into that. And I think that is a healthy conversation for us. So I just wanted to thank you for engaging in this and the due diligence that you've done. You've answered the question of saying, well, here's what would impact if there were no TIF. And then I really appreciate the right side of where you tried to quantify what those changes might be, because I think that can help us have a much deeper conversation as we move forward beyond today.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Agnew.
Thank you. And thank you, Commissioner Pierce, for kind of framing that up, because I think my direct ask would be to the city that as we continue looking at our process, I would love for TIF and what are these things going to cost to be a part of that entire evolution. It feels like right now we say, we'll talk about that later. And I think that gets to your point of it makes it really hard to make some of these trade-off decisions. Because I know they're like very tactical things that I've asked for, right? Of having parking that could be converted into something else down the road, which I know adds to the costs. Having this underpass, I think would be amazing and really drive to the utilization and the connectivity. That has a cost. Additional car charging, right? Like there are all these little things that we've layered on, and those were just ones I could think of for myself throughout these meetings. And so I want us to bring more of that visibility into the discussion earlier on. But I think that's also because what you've presented here today, frankly, isn't a project that would be approved, right? And what I really understood of the ask of Commissioner Pierce, or it was Councilmember Pierce, I think at the time, what would you have presented as a project that you thought would be approved? And that I think would be different, right? Right now, affordable housing is a requirement that we have as a city. There are different things in here as I'm going through, right? If you were to, and I just did like back of the napkin math, but I think it would be approximate, I'll kind of describe my math that I did. I estimated based off of what I saw in here is 524 rental apartments. I did 10%, which was 53 apartment units. And then I forgot off the top of my head when I was doing this math, I estimated like 150,000 for the buy-in. And so that's approximately $8 million. And so that would be something that isn't a part of this calculation that would absolutely add to the cost. And I think just compound that this might not be a feasible project regardless. And so I think this was a helpful exercise, and I think helps bring some of the dollar values to some of the things that we're asking for. But I know it took 2 years to get to this project as is, so I know I can't just put you on the spot to say like, quick, come up with what it would be. But I am genuinely asking, if you were coming into this project and you had it in your mind that TIF would absolutely not be something that would be possible for this site, I don't think that this is what you would have brought forward, because this wouldn't have been approved either, right? So you would have some internal trade-offs. Can you speak to that at all here on the spot of, of what would it look like if you were trying to get something approved and wanted to make the best of this site.
Before you answer that, I just wanted to clarify, the question I asked was if you got little or no TIF, how would that impact your project? So I wasn't actually thinking project that could be approved, right? We talked about that question, but that wasn't the ask that I had for today. So I just wanted to be fair to you.
Thank
in
you for that clarification. It's my ask right now, but on the spot.
Well,
Hold on. Commissioner
I'd like to-
Jackson
I'd like
has
to-
an add on.
yeah, I'd like to just kind of add on, and hopefully you'll approve this, Commissioner Agnew. So you're talking about parking. Assume, and this is going to be, stretch your engineering skills, but assume all parking underground is connected. So we have a big square of parking or 2 rectangles of parking, but then we have just, bare level streets breaking it into 200 blocks, 200-foot blocks on the surface. So underneath that street, it's all parking underground. But we maintain the surface level separation of the streets because that would be required in our, that's sort of the basis of the whole Southdale plan. So this, you've got them merged, but is that a fair qualification, Commissioner Agnew? Okay, thanks.
Glad to respond to the question, and I just have to side comment. It's interesting because we've tried digesting the question that we thought we heard. We even dialogued with multiple people. Okay, how did you hear the question? And there's different ways to answer this question. So I just, out of respect, it's different ways to answer this question. I can answer that on the spot, and I say this with humility and just respect. So I'm not attempting to be abrasive. If assuming no assistance at all, we would have never worked on this project. If we knew it wouldn't be a possibility for that discussion period, we don't think a project works here that meets, because the only way for us to make it work would be for us to ask for a bunch of variances. That's the honest, we would have to ask for several variances and waivers to policies. Now, would it be exactly these 4 things? Maybe it's 3 of the 4 or a combination of something, but it just wouldn't work. We would, and it's kind of, I tried to, for us, for Enclave, it's important, like, it's a core value for us when we go into communities to not be the developer that's asking for, can I get an exception to this? Can I get an exception to that? We really try to frame up the way we work with communities to meet their vision. So I realized the process things you just mentioned and the odds that we're at now and the difficult position we're in because of that, and I respect that. But to your question, Councilmember Agnew, I probably not the answer you're looking for, but that's the truth.
Thank you. And I think where that brings my mind, and just kind of speaking to my fellow commissioners here, is, we look at some of these sites across the city, and this being one of them, of kind of asking ourselves, like, why hasn't this been redeveloped yet? Like, why is it still sitting there as the bunker, as a Macy's furniture store? And there are multiple sites, right? It isn't just this one. And what I hear a lot from people in the community is, these are desirable sites. We shouldn't be using TIF to attract developers to it. And I just think it's a good data point to understand, well, they're still undeveloped today. And what we have as standards as a city have changed from when the original Macy's site was built. And so I do think that, Commissioner Pierce, the way you framed it up of, do we need to change what it is that we're looking for, our comprehensive plan? Like, does our comprehensive plan need to change if we want to set a specific threshold or cap or goal of what TIF is for a city? And I know we've all seen the graph. I think that Manager Neuendorf usually shows it at some points throughout the process of, what percentage of our tax base is within a TIF district compared to other cities across the board. And I always use that kind of mentally as well. And maybe we do want to talk about a hard cap, but maybe it is just thinking relatively where are we at? And if I recall, I don't know the exact percentage right now off the top of my head, and I won't put anyone else on the spot, but we're very, very low on that graph. And so if what we want to take out of this is a higher level conversation about the comprehensive plan and whether we can afford that and what are the mechanisms that we have as a city, maybe one of those things is we say, okay, this is what we want out of a city, this is our comprehensive plan, but we want to balance it with here's our target or our goal for TIF district percentages. I think that might be a way to think about it as well, because we do have TIF in our disposal as something we can do to help encourage developments that we want to see. And so I think that that's where we just, again, need to have that macro level conversation to have an awareness of these trade-offs of, is this site in this area where we can get this underpass and really allow connectivity to one of our other substantial investments within the Centennial Lakes Park area and connect that across under brands. I think that that might be a reasonable conversation for us to have at the top of the house of where do we strategically want to invest up to a certain threshold that we think is reasonable. But again, these are kind of broader conversations, but I do think it's worthwhile for us to talk about as we consider this today. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. See Mr. Anhut out there and Mr. Nuendorf too. But first, let me ask Mr. Brahma. You know, when I look at the left-hand side of the chart you put together, which I appreciate you doing this work on actually short notice, and I don't think Manager Nuendorf has seen this until today. This may or may not be new information or partially new information to him. I doubt it with his level of knowledge that he probably knows all of these things from having gone through these exercises with you over time. But we haven't really talked about what kind of pressures that you're under as a developer in our community, sitting here with an approved project and some, I would think, some potential financing lined up. What kind of a timeline are you on there with respect to potential financing?
Timing-wise, right now, first thing that is the overarching timeline we need to comply with is our purchase agreement. Our deadline is January 10th. So we're trying to back into that, and to be candid, it's getting very tight. And so we're closely monitoring that and discussing that with Macy's. I don't want to speak on behalf of Macy's, but it's been, from their perspective, a long process as well, and I don't think this is the first project that's come to the city, is my understanding, so I just don't know where that conversation will go, is all I can say publicly, but we're under a time crunch right now. As far as debt and equity, the full construction lending, the full final debt and equity, that's something that will come into play before construction starts. Don't know if we've conveyed the detail or if it's been brought up, but Macy's will be leasing back the property, so we're going to buy it, then they're going to lease it back through August of 25. And during that lease back period, we would be obtaining our final equity package and debt financing for construction, so the $300 million. So in the short term here, what we need to accomplish is getting the dollars to close on the land, which is a different process. And so we're feel good about that process, but admittedly it's getting very tight, and with unknowns, candidly, we're looking at 200+ page TIF agreements, 3 of them, that's 600 something pages to get through that and accomplish all that before, with enough time for people to close on. We're in a difficult spot right now. But I say that just sharing information to be transparent. We're going to get through it, and any clear direction you can give helps us and Macy's all move forward. So I know that's not a perfect answer.
Yeah, no, I
that's
didn't
where
expect
we're
a
at.
perfect answer, but I do, when we think about the information that we've just seen for the first time this morning, and we think about having the ability to think all of this through on our own, in addition to sitting here for an hour, roughly, to hear what you're talking about, and hearing things like, well, as Commissioner Jackson brought up, we couldn't improve the regional bike trail, or this affects the passageway connection. That's a work in progress that we're thinking has value in terms of drilling down on that idea to see if it really makes sense. And if you came back with a two-part project instead of a four-part project and the things you're talking about generally here, you know, I think for all of us, having a little bit of time to think this through would be good. But I want to do that in the context of being sensitive to the time pressures that you're under. And I also would like to see, for example, me personally, you know, that old adage, a picture's worth 1,000 words. You know, if we had a new site plan or a potential site plan that embraced some of the ideas that you'd have here on a project that you think could be built, whether, you know, to Commissioner Agnew's point, you know, it may or may not be something that we would approve because we have certain standards that we want to maintain. But the idea that you'd come forward with something that, from a site plan standpoint and from an elevation, just like a sketch plan basis, show us what's the difference, you know. If you go to 2 buildings instead of 4 buildings, and you go to 2 streets instead of 4 streets, and you go to above-ground parking, one of the things that is affecting me is on potentially one of the best pieces of property in our city, you might have to come back with this idea of having exposed parking ramps above ground, above grade. I mean, right on a park, you know? We've seen that already happen over at where Pinstripes is. You know, we put a screen on it, but nonetheless, there's a parking ramp on one of the best pieces of property in town because of opposition from years gone by about what people wanted to see there. So there are things for us to think through too. And as part of that thinking process for me, and I think for others as well, and maybe this is where Manager Newendorf and Mr. Anhut in particular come into play, and that is, what are the implications? I'm going to ask you guys to maybe come up here together. Mr. Brahma, stand by. What are the implications for the general taxpaying public by advancing this project as approved? Now, we've talked about this before, but I think it's an important thing to be thinking about as we maybe even delay this conversation for 2 weeks, or you know, but trying to be sensitive to what Mr. Brahma is facing from a pressure standpoint, from a financing, because as we've gone through this project, he's said all along, this isn't going to be this isn't going to be a funding issue, you know, and I don't want to put him in a spot where it is a funding issue, or put us in a spot where it is a funding issue, because we've already got 2 projects that are approved sitting on France Avenue with market conditions that aren't allowing them to go forward. So, Mr. Newendorf, I don't know if you want to lead off on that question.
Sure.
You want me to repeat it, or do you?
Could you repeat it? Sure.
Yeah, and maybe this wasn't very artfully stated, but I want to know what you think the implications are for the general taxpaying public in Edina by advancing this project as it's been approved.
I'll start with the general, and then Nick can jump into some details. So the biggest impact is having a private developer make the investment into our community and deliver the items that we as a community said we wanted. So as we've went through the process to prepare the Southdale plan, the comprehensive plan, the sustainability policy, the affordable housing policy, you know, as you recall, those took years to develop with lots of input from the community. And now we can make progress on each one of those fronts. The developer is willing to take the risk and make that investment conditioned upon the city participating at the end and reimbursing them for a portion of it. But to me, the biggest impact to the taxpayer is they get that result that they're looking for, and without the risk of the city going out for debt and building it ourselves, without the risk of the city buying land, building plazas, building parking, so we get the benefit with very little risk or no risk.
Right. So what about this notion that it spreads a more general burden on the general taxpaying public when these taxes are collected on a tax increment financing sort of basis, and but we still got, you know, there's more people living here and there's more to maintain together. And I know that some folks out there worry about that, but my understanding is that, let me just preface it by saying, and this maybe to Mr. Anhut, is that if the market rate increase of your property in your town is less than, annually, less than the proposed levy, you can capture that differential to help raise the standard on where the where the level was frozen to help pay for some of those expenses that people worry about, that you're putting more on us by virtue of building this project for $300 million until the tax increment financing district is over 25 years from now. How do you deal with that problem?
Well, thank you for the
How do
question.
you answer that question? I guess that.
Nick Anhut with Ellers and Associates. We're financial advisors to the HRA and how it uses its resources. So in part, to answer the question, we're talking about the use of tax increment financing, which itself is designed to capture the new value that's created after this private investment is made, and potentially harnessing that additional tax capacity to help pay for portions of the project that we've mentioned that are driving a gap in the financing of that project. We're also talking about only using 75% of that tool to help fund this project. That tool is designed to shift the burden or the risk to the developer. It is incumbent that the developer actually builds that project, generates the tax base, and then continues to operate that project at an amount that actually pays the taxes to create the financing in the first place. And so we can think about other potential city resources, leveraging your own existing dollars to pay for those things, but that would put your own money at risk. You essentially would be investing directly into this project and then expecting it to deliver later on to repay the funding that you're providing. So we're using a kind of a passive investment strategy in this. We're deferring the benefit that's created to the tax base in order to obtain all of these amenities that we want in this project. And at the end of the day, it's going to come back onto the tax base eventually and add to the pie of these existing taxpayers, but not for the period while the TIF district is established. But TIF itself is also designed intentionally to try to protect the potential that this project might not help fund future increases in services that you find necessary. When you increase your levy in the future to pay for all of the things that the city does and provides its taxpayers, if that rate increases in the future, the property actually helps offset a portion of that increase, because the tax rate that is put into effect when a TIF district is established is frozen in time. So at any point, if that rate rises above the frozen level, the taxes related to that differential do flow to the local jurisdictions. So that is a hypothetical. That is incumbent on the fact that maybe tax rates would rise above the level that they are today. That is a protection that's built into this mechanism. So it is built into how TIF operates. Those taxes are not captured for that entire period of time. It's only the taxes related to your existing tax rate right now, which, by the way, for this project, would be after you've adopted your 2025 levies. So the property that it sits there today is still going to contribute the same amount of taxes while this TIF district is operational as it is for 2025 going forward. The portion of the increase after it's developed is going to be captured within a TIF district only to the extent that that tax rate matches in the future. If the county, the school, the city need to increase that total rate in the future because of a new demand on public services, that additional part above the frozen rate goes to your local general levies to help offset that need. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I know it's technical, but what I hear you saying generally is that there's a mechanism established through the law that allows us to increase that frozen base or the increment above the frozen base if we have a levy that increase that helps defray any and pay for any increase in the demand for services.
I think I would phrase it a different way.
But please do.
You don't have the discretion necessarily to choose to turn it on or off, right? What you have right now is we're going to establish a TIF district, and we're going to establish it based on the tax rates that are in effect today. If in the future, it's not going to limit your ability to raise your levies in the future if you need to, or future bodies. I'm not pointing at you all directly, but a future council needs to raise its levy and it causes an increase in that tax rate, then there's nothing in the TIF district that's going to preclude that ability or restrict you in any way. But the way the taxes are going to flow is up until the point of the frozen tax rate, it's going to still be captured within the TIF district. But if there's an increase in that rate above this level, the taxpayers are expected to pay in 2025, then that money directly to that, I'm going to use increment. I know increment on top of increment, but that incremental difference is going to help fund those levy increases.
Can I?
Well, yeah, just one other segue off that, and then I go to Commissioner Pierce. But it seems to me that one of the other potential advantages, arguable advantages of tax increment financing is that the project gets built. The taxpayer gets the advantage of all of the benefits that were created when the project is finished. During the entire time that tax increment financing district is in existence. And it's getting, and then it's getting, the developer's getting repaid out of the increment that flows post the completion of the project.
Correct. TIF is best viewed from a long-term perspective. I mean, we're not making an investment today just to have a quick flip and a big, a big payday tomorrow. The city's been here for over 100 years. We're going to be here 100 years in the future. So as we make some of these long-term investments and some of these long-term investment strategies, we're really looking not to tomorrow, but 10 years in the future, 20 years in the future, 30 years in the future. And it's these types of massive investments that will help solidify and stabilize that future. So that's usually how I look at it, is with a long-term lens.
Yeah, so just by way of example, I think if you look at 50th in France, where we tore down an exempt piece of tax property, which was the middle ramp, and Nolan Mains now exists there, and we used tax increment financing down there, and the things that we got out of it were improvements on the ramp on the north side of the road. We got a heated underground parking that's free for people in our town, free across the road. We got plazas and passageways and new businesses and all these public amenities that people are able to take immediate advantage of when the project is finished. And what I think it was about $10 million in TIF down at 50th in France?
Right, yeah, the TIF at 50th was a $10 million TIF note.
And so as I recall, every 6 months now, they're paying $600,000 worth of taxes, and based on them doing all the work, now they're getting reimbursed. 90% of that probably goes back to the developer to reimburse them for the money they expended until the $10 million is satisfied, plus interest.
That's exactly correct. And that place has really, turned into a place that people love. There's more. It did everything that we had hoped it would do. I mean, as you mentioned, it was a tax-exempt parking garage that was not ADA accessible, and it was a back loading dock. And we turned it into a place where people love, with events and programming and the indoor parking. With that use of TIF, we leveraged the developer's investment. We had them build us the parking garage underneath the building at their expense. In the past, the city made those investments. So that we were able to limit the debt risk to the city by leveraging the developer's investment. And we've used that model for TIF and Edina on several projects.
And we put a piece of exempt property back on the tax rolls after 40 plus years.
Correct.
All right, I'm going to go to Commissioner Pierce. He went ahead, then Commissioner Jackson.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that was just said, starting from the answer that you gave to the question. But for me, like, the comparison is different. And so that's one of the reasons this is so complicated. If I compare which is better in the long run, given our current circumstances, is it better that we get a reduced amount of tax capacity in 2 years right to the general fund versus 20 to 25 years from now. And so I'm trying to compare that to, and you're comparing that to the community benefits, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's kind of, when I think about this, that's one of the things that I wonder.
I think that's a key question, really, is the wait worth it?
Yeah.
Mr.
Chair, one thing I would say about what Commissioner Pierce just said is it's important to remember that there's not a new revenue stream that goes directly to the general fund. We increase our tax capacity, which means that we have the possibility of offsetting our levy. Our levy would be slightly smaller around everybody in the community, but it wouldn't in and of itself create new dollars.
Commissioner Jackson.
Yes, thank you. So I don't know if this will work, but what I'd like to see is one of the things that we haven't talked a whole lot about is this park maintenance fee. And that's a big deal to me. Centennial Lakes needs repair. We're going to be bringing more, every year it needs maintenance. And we're going to be bringing more people into the area. And as a result, one of the elements of this potential TIF deal is a park maintenance fee. So I'd like to request from Mr. Ellers, if possible, or Mr. Anhut at Ellers, you get that a lot, I'm sure. Let's assume the purchase price is that we're talking about is the value of the land. And let's assume instead of this project, it gets a complete renovation, so let's double the purchase price as a new value. If you could run the existing tax numbers, not right now, but I think this would help me, what the tax flow would be, this purchase price doubled, and the taxes that would be generated from that, which is, people talk about incremental change instead of transformational change. So incremental is they put a second story on here and repave the lot. So we'll just say we're going to double the value of what it is now. What taxes at our current tax rate would flow from that, and then contrast that with the annual fee paid for this park maintenance, because I think that's kind of an apples to apples. So the taxes that would flow to the city would obviously go to the general fund. It wouldn't go straight to Centennial Lakes. But I'm very concerned about making sure that Centennial Lakes continues to be maintained in a world-class fashion, the way we've been doing it. And this is a new revenue stream for that. So that's kind of revenue stream to revenue stream. I would really like to see that at some point.
We're happy to do that. We've done those kind of comparisons before. And just, the starting point today is, today the site pays zero in park fees. So any dollar above zero is a win in that category, but we can readily put that comparison together for you.
Thank you.
I think we can defer that.
Is this a conversation we can table for 2 weeks?
Sure. Yeah. The second item was a proposed resolution to take action on the TIF district. That action would be conditioned upon the city council's final action. This is just one of the many steps in the process, but we can readily defer that to the next meeting. Right now we're aiming to, based on where we are with the negotiations and the contract preparation, we're aiming on early November to have final approvals on this project. And so by pushing this item off today, that's not a problem.
Okay. Mr. Brahma, can you come up? Is that, we've got people that have other things they need to do after 9 o'clock, and you too, I'm sure. Does that work okay for you too? If we postpone this conversation for 2 weeks and then come back? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you need any kind of a motion on that, Mr. Neuendorf, or just, it doesn't seem like we would, because we haven't taken any action or asked to table anything, so. All right, let's, anything else for the go to the order? Oh, just one thing I thought of is that the League of Women Voters has a presentation by somebody from the state at the senior center at 10 o'clock this morning on tax increment financing, how it works in Minnesota. So if you're interested in hearing from one of the people from the state, I would assume a statutorily based presentation on what TIF is all about. You can go over to the Senior Center at 10 o'clock at Grandview for that presentation. Does anybody else have anything for the good of the order here? Mr. Executive Director, nothing
Only to let
report?
you know that you'll get a first look at your proposed HRA meeting schedule at next week's council meeting.
Yeah. And I just wanted to say that, having been in a meeting with you, I think it was yesterday, I like your beard better today than yesterday.
Thank you for that.
Looks good,
Yeah.
looks good. All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
And a motion by Commissioner Jackson, second by Commissioner Agnew to adjourn the meeting of the HRA this Thursday, October 10th, 2024. Any further discussion? All those in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Carried. We stand adjourned.